Got to read between the lines. Well, the truth is very simple, very hard to find.
Hello everybody, welcome to another edition of What's Going On. I'm your host, Tom D'Ambra. As always, we're extremely thankful you take the time from your busy day to watch our program. You may notice, my friends, that I have no paperwork in front of me. I live in a very rural, completely off-grid system. We don't have electricity, grid electricity that comes down our road. And I'm living in the dark ages currently. We have a problem with our off-grid system, so I am unable to print, access the internet, et cetera, et cetera. So we're going to have a chat today. And I was thinking about where should we start with this chat. There's so much going on. And I figured we'd start out with this. Yet again, the Institute for Health has said, oh, we apologize. This is just yesterday. Oh, we apologize. Our flu vaccines are not going to work again this year. Oh, we just missed the wrong strand again. You take that mercury, you take that thimerosal, you take all the rest of the toxins that are in these shots that we're going to mandate if you're in the medical field. They don't work. They're toxins in your system. It's an insult to your immune system, but we're going to force you to take it anyway. Isn't that correct, NVRH? Doesn't work again. Your people are going to be sick again. But that makes perfect sense, doesn't it? Because then they can go to who? The doctors. To do what? Make more profits. Beautiful. Nicely done. That's what happens when a Rockefeller Foundation called the American Medical Association, yes, a Rockefeller group formed by the Rockefellers to control your medicine, not your health care, your medicine. Do you know where the word pharmaceutical comes from? Pharmakia. Look it up. We've read this to you verbatim over the 300 plus shows we've done. Pharmakia. Break that into English. You know what it means? Sorcery. Sorcery. Think of that. Now, you know, folks, on the way in, I was thinking about, you know, we have done 300 plus shows, and we have covered such a spectrum of information that you're not getting in the public fool system, that you're not getting from the mainstream media, and you're certainly not going to hear this from the pulpits. Those are the three main avenues of controlling the thought and reasoning process of the American people. They are all controlled by outside entities that the average American has never even heard of. For instance, you think your public fool system, curriculum, and all the rest of it is controlled by the state you reside in, or maybe you're even naive enough to think that your local school boards have some kind of influence on the curriculum. You'd be very naive to believe that. You see, all the local school boards are, and I have spoken to people who have been on many school boards, all they are is a liaison between shoveling the trash and the high taxes and the low educational system that we have. I mean, think about this. They have reduced the testing qualities. They have reduced the curriculum. They have even reduced the curriculum for teachers to get certificates to teach. Think of that. But yet, the cost of these schools and programs exponentially every single year go up. And why is that? Because it's not about the children. Do you remember the quote that we had from Project Veritas, Veritas, Latin for truth, that when they were talking about the manufacturers of the books and the two women are talking? Now these girls are all about selling. They create the curriculum. And what did they say, unbeknownst to them that they were being filmed? They laughed. They laughed joyfully, like you got to be kidding me laughing, when the person who was doing the journalistic investigative work said to them, well, what about the school children? And they laughed. They said, it's got nothing to do with the kids. It's got to do with the sales. So who do you think controls the curriculum that your children are being absorbed? Let me give you a hint. It's based in New York City. It has a tall building that was donated, the land and the financing for the building, by the Rockefellers. You know it as UNESCO, United Nations Education, Scientific, and Cultural Organization, controls the curriculum for your children's minds. Not you. You don't control anything. Folks, as Bertrand Russell said, and we read this verbatim to you, and I'm going to paraphrase it, because what he said was that the goal of education is to have the student, for the rest of his life, not be able to think or reason as an individual, but to only react as his schoolmaster would have desired. That's Bertrand Russell, 1954. The feds took over education in 1964. Can any one of you show me in the Constitution where the federal government is supposed to be involved in education? Doesn't exist. So, go get your flu shots, because the AMA and all the medical systems that go along with it, they need you to be sick. Why? Because the whole goal of creating this illusion that the government is some kind of benevolent organization looking out for the well-being of its people is completely that. It's an illusion. And you have to be delusional to believe it. But the average American, being brought up and indoctrinated in the public school system, cannot think and reason and dissect what is in front of them. I see it every day. I remember talking to people 30 years ago that the Federal Reserve is a private, for-profit banking corporation, which is a separate entity from the United States government. Everybody laughed at me. Everybody thought I was out of my mind. Now, we have made progress, not in the public school system, because they're too busy teaching things like Common Core math. And by the way, how many years have we been asking for a school administrator and or a teacher to come on this program and explain Common Core math to the viewing audience? Folks, I will tell you, you can't even play a game of crib using Common Core math. I know a lot of young people, and I will tell you, you take away whatever little instrument they're using to push buttons, they cannot think, they cannot reason. Hell, folks, go to a supermarket. They can't count change back to you unless that machine gives them what they're supposed to be counting back to you. They can't do the math, my friends. And this is all on purpose. They do not want a healthy, vibrant, educated mass. They want a dumbed down, ill, weakened, dependent mass. Why? Because they have all these Judas goats out there. Now, a lot of you are thinking, what's a Judas goat, Tom? A Judas goat, my friends, is a goat that is kept year after year after year. And they keep that goat as the head goat, if you would, the head sire, to control the flock, just like the head bull controls the herd. So when it comes time for slaughtering time, because the flock, the herd of goats, the group of goats, they're used to following this particular head goat. Well, when it comes time to go to the slaughter funnels, livestock and all that, what they do is the Judas goat leads the group, the herd, right down into the chutes, then takes a right. And then the fence behind the herd is closed. The fence in front of the herd is closed. The Judas goat goes back to his stall, and everybody else gets slaughtered. And we see this every day. The politicians are Judas politicians. The school administrators are Judas school administrators. Some of your clergy are nothing more than Judas clergy. What about George Washington University? They are in such financial dire straits that they have laid off staff, they have cut services, they have even gone as far as to reduce times that the heat is allowed to be turned on so they could cut their heating bill back. Yet with all these measurements taking place, over the weekend they had a new president that they had to inaugurate for George Washington University. Now you would think that this person would say, well, we're going to make this short and sweet. We're not going to spend any money on this. And we're going to try to, get this back up to where maybe we can turn the heat on again for our students. Maybe we can have more faculty. Maybe we can keep our infrastructure up to date and plan for future infrastructure improvements or gains. No. George Washington University, even though they're in dire straits, spent $500,000, $500,000, inaugurating their new president. Doesn't matter to them. They are Judas administrators, taking your children to the slaughterhouse. That's all they're doing. Think of this. And you pay, and we pay, and you don't even have a choice whether you can pay or not. Think about it. I don't have children in the school system. Never have. I have been forced to pay an outrageous fee. I think it's 91% now of the property taxes in my town here in Vermont go to a school system that is failed. But it hasn't failed, has it? The school system has done exactly what it was designed to do: to dumb down the curriculum, to dumb down the reasoning process, to make the children against the family unit and the parents, and to get the child to have allegiance to the state. They've done a very good job of it. And while both parents are working to substantiate an average of 62% tax burden and fees and all this that go to the government burden, who's raising your kids? You're paying for what? Someone else to raise your children while you work, both of yous work, and then 62% of that on average is going to the government. So one of you, Mr. and Mrs. America, is working all year. If you were making the same pay, 50-50, one of you is working all year to pay this ridiculous, burdensome tax system. And the other person still putting in 12%. And that doesn't include, my friends, the cost of going to work, of clothing for work. And who's raising your children, like I said? Oh, and who's paying for that? Do you understand what I'm telling you? And you wonder why the family unit in this country has been destroyed? And the tax system is set up to destroy the family system. The welfare system is set up to destroy the family system. Do you know Russia? I know you may not believe this, but you know Russia has a welfare system? And do you know in Russia, if you're on welfare, both the mother and father must be in the same household? And if they're not, you're not getting a thing. Here in the United States, we have a much more elaborate welfare system. But the father's not allowed to be part of the family. And if the father is part of the family, all the benefits get cut. Why is that? Why is that? So now, there's so much to talk about, my friends. We have Agent Stork, who interviewed, if I may jump around, who interviewed Michael Flynn, who interviewed Abby Human, who interviewed all of the cronies that went along with the Clinton criminal cartel known as the Clinton Foundation. And now we find out that this person is a loyalist to the Clintons. So another loyalist to the Clintons, Robert Mueller, who was a self-appointed prosecutor over this supposed Trump collusion with Russia, which obviously didn't take place because now they're going back 20 years into his financial records trying to find something. But yet, there's no prosecution of the Clinton Foundation dealings with Uranium One and the Russians. There's no prosecution of the FBI agent Stork for the integrity of the FBI. You think they would have got rid of the guy and made a public display of him? No. They merely transferred him into another job because you have to protect the people who are part of the just us system. Now we find out that as of this morning, the Congress has held the FBI and the Department of Justice for contempt of Congress. Why? Because under Representative Nunes' committee, They demanded, which they have the right to do, and submitted, which they have the right to do, and subpoenaed, which they have the right to do, multiple people for multiple facets of various parts of information. Both the FBI and the DOJ were issued these subpoenas and all these proclamations. And guess what? Not one agent, not one bit of information from the DOJ or the FBI was presented to Congress before the date, the stipulation. What do you think would happen to me or you if we did that? What do you think would happen? You think we'd go bye-bye? You see, folks, it's the just us system. Just us, and we ain't part of it. So now, the FBI has said, not worried about you, Congress. Department of Justice, not worried about you, Congress, because they know no one's going to go to jail. No one's going to lose their job or their retirement pension. Nobody. Because the laws are kept to keep the little people little. They're not met to what the Constitution says. They're not met to provide the means for the three things that the government's supposed to do: protect life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Do you realize that's the only mandate of the federal government, to do those three things? Life, protect life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, by our founding documents. They've done neither. As a matter of fact, they've cost millions of people's lives or early demise in life through their control of medicine, through their use of chemtrails, vaccinations, GMO food, fluorinated toxins in the water. They have done an early demise to all of us. And along the way, made us very unhealthy. And along the way, because we can't go through the reasoning process, and we can't think, and we can't see what's in front of us and digest it and be analytical on it, because we're so indoctrinated, we go back to the very same system continually at a very high cost to us, gaining the same results. I'll give you an example. We have the highest health, I hate using the word healthcare cost, but that's how Americans correlate to it. So we have the highest healthcare cost in the world. In the world. We read this to you verbatim. Yet, we have the highest cancer rates. We have the highest, all of it. I mean, I don't even know where to go. I could sit here for the next 30 minutes and tell you about how detrimental our health is. All because we can't think for ourselves. We have politicians. Ever break that word down? I know we did before. We broke down the Latin. Poly, Latin, many of, tick, blood-sucking organisms. Politicians, many blood-sucking organisms. But we have people like Robert Mueller, self-appointed prosecutor. We have what you now have come to know as the deep state. It's funny because just 4 years ago, if someone told you there was a system within the system of a government that is foreign and above and outside the mechanisms that you perceive to be the government, you would have said, that person's crazy. That person's nuts. There's no deep state. There's no New World Order. Even though the New World Order, Novus Ordo Seclorum, is on the medium of exchange that you have in your pocket and that most of you base your life on. even though that instrument is an instrument of debt that you've been ignorantly made a co-surety to because you were bonded through an instrument called the birth certificate. This is how deep it goes. Think of that. Think of that your children are bonded. And they have dumbed us down so greatly that every single mother, because in law, the mother has the right to negotiate contract through its natural relationship for that child until that child has reached a legal age to negotiate contract for oneself. So the mother's in the hospital. All the mother wants to do is get out of the hospital. I don't blame her. And get her and the child home. Totally understand. But because we have been done down so greatly and so naively we trust these very entities that are not only poisoning us, but are killing us, are taxing us, are manipulating us, that we just sign here, flip, sign here, flip, sign here without reading a thing. You're signing a bond, mothers, to enslave your children economically. We are bonded. I remember years and years ago, I brought in a copy of my bond. I was born 11/10/50. I showed it to you on the TV. I was born 11/10/58. I was bonded 11/12/58 by the Midwest Bank Note Company. How did that happen? My mother was a great mother. My mother would have done anything for her children. Anything. How did that happen? She obviously would not have done this knowing all the information. Well, my mother was in the same circumstance that I just presented to you. She wanted to get home. She wanted to get the baby home. She wanted to get out of the hospital. She was naive enough to trust the very entities that we have been indoctrinated to trust. I will never forget talking to my mother about this and presenting the facts to her back in the, I want to say, early 90s. And my mother's eyes starting to welt up in tears when she realized what she had done to her children. But here's where it gets even greater. The average American is completely unaware of this. Why is this not taught in class in the public school system? Why not? You would think something of economical things were being bonded would be such an important issue that it would be taught in the public school system. They don't want you educated. They want it so you can't even count change back. They've done it, haven't they? My friends, you take away whatever device your child is holding, and you go ahead and you start asking questions. You see what's here and what's not here. Do you remember some time ago, we brought in a test, I believe it was for 6th or 4th grade test. Do you remember that? I remember I took the test, and I consider myself well-read, especially outside the public school system, and I was floored because I think I got an 80. And I went around to a place that I worked at the time, and I asked some fellow employees, I hate using that word, that's an IRS term, I asked some fellow employees to take the test just to see, you know, boy, maybe I'm not as versed as I thought I was. I was the only one who passed the test. These were college-educated people. I was the only one who passed the test. I'm not trying to put myself on a pedestal, just an example, my friends, of where our indoctrination system has taken us as a people. We have, jumping around again, we have Bill Clinton meeting the Attorney General on the tarmac in Phoenix, Arizona, and we're so gullible that she says, oh, we talked about the grandkids. It was such a nice conversation. And the American people accepted that. They accepted that. Think of that. Now we find out through FBI reports that, quote unquote, a deal was made on the tarmac. Of course a deal was made on the tarmac. The deal was made years before. They just wanted to make sure everybody was on the same page. Just like now. Same thing going on now. It's all deals. DOJ, FBI, just completely rebukes the Congress. Not a problem. I'm not worried about my job. I'm not worried about my pension. I'm not worried about going to jail. I'm not worried about being fined. Why? Because the Just Us system is going to protect me as long as I participate with the Just Us system. And this is not to say that every FBI agent out there is a scumbag. Now, the ones that killed the Von Finnegan, the ones that killed the children at Waco, the ones that killed Ron Hudiochi, that killed the Weaver family, are scumbags. How come none of them people were put up on charges? Why? Because they were all protected and eventually promoted. We have read that to you verbatim. There are good FBI agents out there that swore allegiance to the Constitution, that understand that their oaths mean something, and the problem being, my friends, they've been living in darkness because they're afraid to even pursue their ideals of serving the Constitution for the American people. They were afraid. They lived in fear of it, just like the average American lives in fear today of the government. If you ask yourself, what's your biggest fear? You ask the average businessman, what is their biggest inhibitor to opening and constructing business? What's their biggest cost? They'll tell you it's the government. It's not the product. It's not getting the materials for product. It's not transportation for the product. It's not being able to sell. It's not that there's not a market out there for their idea. It's upstart, cost, and the government. That's their biggest problem. I should know. I have had 2 successful businesses. I will tell you from hands on, that was mine and it is today. Think about all the lies, all the deception, all the wars that have been crony wars. Let me see, let's start. In my lifetime alone, just in my lifetime alone, right? We'll start with Vietnam. DOD Secretary Robert McNamara, known as his deathbed confession. Gulf of Tonkin never happened. The Maddox wasn't attacked. That's okay. We want profits, man. We've got this evil communist thing. We've got to stop at all aspects, all geographical aspects, because if it can take Vietnam, it'll take Southeast Asia. And if it takes Southeast Asia, it'll work its way into all of Asia. Think of World War II, the greatest generation ever to live, right? I disagree with that, totally. The greatest generation ever to live was completely snickered. The greatest generation to live, the wars were being set up for them when they were children. Because in 1913, when the private bank, Federal Reserve, took over the money system, They took over the money system in 1913, December 23rd, 1913, while the Congress was away for the Christmas break. We've read this to you verbatim. So what happened? It took them only 20 years, actually less. When you really get into it, it took them 17 years to control and destroy the most prolific, laissez-faire economy in the history of the world. In the history of mankind, it only took them 17 years to destroy it from all aspects, to destroy its intrinsic value and to destroy its purchasing power. And how did they do it? They did it by controlling the issuance of the currency. Why does a private bank control the issuance of the currency of the United States government and then charge the United States government an interest bond due on each one that they gave the supposed Treasury permission to print? For example, the top fund. The bankers got, far as we know, because the total figure has never been discovered. Ben Bernanke told Senator Bernie Sanders, one of the few times I've ever agreed with Bernie Sanders, one of the very few, that when he said to Ben Bernanke at the top hearing meetings of the committee, he said, Mr. Bernanke, Mr. Chairman, are you going to tell the American people where these trillions of dollars went? And Ben Bernanke looked right at him and said, no. No. That was just it. He didn't say no, blah, 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 blah. He just said no. In other words, Mr. Sanders, just what in the hell are you going to do about it? Because you have no control over us. I'm surprised you didn't say, Mr. Sanders, I'm not going to tell you a damn thing because you have no control over us, and you are obviously ignorant because you've never read the Federal Reserve Act of 1913. Well, I have, and I will tell you Mr. Bernanke was correct. They've had the warnings, Louis T. McFadden, Senator Lindbergh, all of them. Up to today, James Traficant, representative from Ohio. So think of the lies. Everything they present to you is a lie. The education system isn't about education, it's about indoctrination system. The healthcare system isn't about having good health, it's about making you ill for profit and to keep you under their guise. The IRS is an entity of the foreign for-profit banking corporation, Federal Reserve. Hell, folks, we read to you years ago the Grace Committee report. We read it verbatim to you from Ronald Reagan when he set up a committee known as the Grace Committee in the 80s, and he wanted the American people to, he said, boy, we have all this money coming in from the American people. At that time, I think it was like 41 or 43%. Now it's 62. But we have all this money, billions of dollars coming in every year from American people. I want to tell the American people where all this money is going. And the Grace Committee reported to the executive branch and eventually to the Congress and said, and I quote to you, that not one nickel of the American people's income tax goes to the operations of the United States government, quote unquote. Not one nickel. So where does all this money go? It goes to the bankers, the Federal Reserve bankers. You see, because they not only do they want the wealth, and not only do they want you to live in intimidation and fear, which they have accomplished completely. Hey, folks, you just think of the word IRS or the acronym IRS, Internal Revenue Service. Internal, within the country, revenue, your sweat equity service, not to you, to them. Very simple. Write a check to the IRS and see who endorses the back of it. It'll say Federal Reserve Banking System. I remember we brought one in years ago and showed it to you. And where does this debt come from? This debt comes from because every time The Federal Reserve gives the treasury of the insolvent corporation United States Incorporated. And now you're thinking, well, when did the United States become a corporation? 1871, the Organic Act of 1871. And that's what this was all about. It's what the Civil War was about. Hey, folks, I want you to think about this. If you were a Confederate, a Southern young man at the time in the 1860s, would you have gone to war, risked life and limb, left your family, left your farm for your family to go on their own, to feed their own, to substantiate the family? Would you have vacated and abandoned all that to go to war with all the risks that go along with going to war? So, depending who you read, between 6 and 4% of the rich people in the South and the North could maintain slavery? Do you really think every male would have volunteered the way they did for the Confederacy? So a bunch of rich people could maintain their slaves? Come on. Think for yourselves for one time. There's a great example of why the American people are so indoctrinated they can't think for themselves. Do you think that's what all them guys went to war for? So a 4% to 6% of the rich people of the total population of the United States could hold slaves? No. They did because they saw the federal encroachment by Washington, D.C. upon the sovereignty rights of the states per the Constitution of the United States. That's why they left and went to war, and many of them died. And that's why the South was pillaged by Sherman after, under orders from Grant. Oh, by the way, did you know that Grant kept slaves? That's right, Grant was a slave owner. Did you know that Grant kept his slaves after the Civil War? Did you know that? And you know, when they were asked about it, you know what his quote was? Cheap, good labor's hard to find these days. Think of that. The guys in Vietnam, the guys in Korea, the guys in World War II, World War I, the Lusitania. We blew up the Lusitania. We blew up the USS Maine in Cuba for the Spanish-American War of 1898. That was the first war where and then of course the Boxer Rebellion, all that. That was the first war where the United States, okay, we've got the continental United States from sea to shining sea, now we're going to think globally. And we're going to use this guy named George Hegel's Hegelian dialectic to get the American people to go along with this war. And it was so successful, they've been doing it ever since. Nobody wanted to get involved in Europe's war in World War I. Nobody. Nobody in the United States. They tried posters, they tried all these things. They couldn't get the guys to sign up. Blow up the Lusitania, bang, millions sign up the next day. They couldn't get the Americans to go to war for World War II because the lessons learned in World War I, you would think. But what happened? We cracked the Japanese Purple Code, C-O-D-E. The base of that word is coda in Latin. And what coda means, to be altered secretly. You know, we got to break the code. We got to crack the code. Did you ever wonder why it's traffic code, IRS code, UCMJ code, all of it? It's all code. Why? Because the language has been altered secretly. So let's get back to what I was talking about. So what did they do? They cracked the Purple Code. Harry Hopkins' 8-point plan to make Japan attack the United States with embargoes and various things. We knew what fleet was leaving from Hiroshima, what fleet was leaving from Tokyo. We knew where they were rendezvousing. We had a 96-hour window when they were going to attack. That's why we moved Battleship Row from San Diego to Hawaii, because the Navy had already come to the understanding through the advanced technology in aviation that aircraft carriers were the weapons of the future, at least the immediate future. in that, you know what, we're not going to need these battleships, so we're going to put them out there for cannon fodder. So we can have thousands of them die, men die who manned them battleships, and they're going to be cannon fodder to do what? To create the crisis so we can get you to go to war. Think about this, World War II veterans. Why is it you fought and bled and so many of your comrades died and you carried the luggage and the baggage of killing for the rest of your lives? To free the world from all the mean things, right? Fighting for democracy. World War I, the war to end all wars. World War I was to get the League of Nations in. Didn't happen. World War II, the United Nations got in. So the guys in World War II, their childhood, they went through the Great Depression because of the bankers. And then when they got old enough, because of the bankers, they went to one of the greatest wars known to mankind. All because they were deceived. Because they were deceived. Because they naively believed their media of the day, the government of the day. Think about that. And why was it that World War I and World War II, none of the guys or families wanted to go, have their sons go to war? Because they were educated. It took that Hegelian dialectic, and I see it used every day, and I've done this a million times in this program. Crisis, reaction, solution. Create a crisis, get the emotional response you want from the people, bring in the solution, and the people will accept it because of the factor of fear or anger that you created by creating the crisis. Very simple, three-point triangle. It's worked and worked and worked in so many different ways on so many different nations of so many different people. Vietnam, USS Maddox wasn't attacked. 15 years of killing millions of Vietnamese and 58,000 American soldiers, never mind all the baggage and all the cultural wars that went on in the 60s and 70s. One of the most disruptive times in the history of our country was the 60s and the 70s. More division, racial division. Think of that. These are all tools to keep us divided and ignorant. But let's go on in my lifetime for wars. Weapons of mass destruction. How about that one? Didn't happen, did it? Big joke, wasn't it? Remember George Bush? Go online, punch in George Bush jokes about weapons of mass destruction. You'll see it. He's at a podium speaking to all his donors. They all knew it was a gag, even while guys were dying overseas, fighting the wars. George Bush is at the podium. Oh, no weapons of mass destruction here. Oh, no weapons of mass destruction here. They're laughing their asses off. They're having, because it's a big party, it's a big gag. They're laughing at you. They're laughing at you. They're laughing at the soldiers and the Marines and all that were overseas, the sailors and the Coast Guards and the Air Force personnel that were all risking their life and limb in the false idolatry that this person had weapons of mass destruction that was a threat to our nation and our allies. Never happened. And the only chemical weapons that he did use against the Kurds, which was very unfortunate, he bought through us. And who was in charge of that whole thing? Go online, you'll see Hussein and Donald Rumsfeld shaking hands on the deal. Unbelievable. How about some other facades for you? Al-Qaeda. Oh, which is now ISIS. Or is that ISIL this week? I forget. What are they calling it this week, folks? What are they calling Al-Qaeda or ISIS or ISIL or Al-Nusra? What are they calling them this week? What did Lieutenant General Michael Flynn teach us? Quote unquote, the Obama administration funded, supplied, and trained Al-Qaeda. And when he said that, and then General Jones chairman of the Joint Chiefs, came out in Congress and said, we will not be Al-Qaeda's Air Force. What did they do? They just changed the name to ISIS, which, by the way, is the god of war. Why? Because they know the American people have been indoctrinated and trained to have memories of goldfish. And they have indoctrinated and trained us to be good mushrooms. We're always in the dark. So, and I could go on. I could go on about this for weeks. So, why is it that the school system doesn't teach us about, how about even simple math, but what about how we bond our children, and why we're bonded, and what the Federal Reserve is, and what it's not? Why is the Constitution not taught anymore? Why is God and his teachings of morality and love been taken out of the secular school systems? Why are we forced, through the threat and duress of arms and or imprisonment or losing everything, to pay these bankers, even though no one can show me or many other people the law that mandates we have to? Why is it Harry Reid, the thief that he is, did an interview and said, we have a voluntary tax system? Why? Because we volunteer for it under the duress of living in fear. That's why. Why the American people lost faith that we can turn this around, that we can make positive results, that we can hold these scumbag crooks available to all the thievery, all the murder, all the lying, all the perjury that is going on. Because the American people have been taught how to lose and live with it. That's why. We don't have faith in the system. We don't know God. We have no understanding of the basic foundations of our laws and our historical basis as it's supposed to be. And we can't even think or contemplate the sacrifices made by so many so that we would not find ourselves and the future of our children in such a despaired situation. But there's a little glimmer of hope. We're starting to see the mainstream media's credibility, 6%. The number one growth in education in this country is what I know as parochial schools. The number one growth, the number one growth is homeschooling. The number two in foundational education is parochial schools. People are turning away from the public fool system. People are turning away from the mainstream media. People are starting to get their Bibles out outside of the indoctrination 501c3 IRS corporations you know as the churches, and starting to read for themselves. A very, very small percentage, but let me tell you, when we turned our ways from all the encroachments of King George, only 3% of the American population had the knowledge and the courage to say, here's my line of sand, no more. As Sam Adams says, it takes a very small minority to ignite the brush fires in the minds of men. That's what this show has been about for all these years. Because it is our hope that we are just one pixel in the screen to present to the American people exactly where we are and where we're not. Fake, we don't have money. We bond our children. This is where we're at. We don't own our land, Senate Document 43. We've gone through that. Senate Document 93-549. I mean, all day. We have read this stuff to you for years verbatim. All we have to do now is digest it and act upon that knowledge. My friends, we're very thankful you took the time from your busy day to watch our program. We always close in asking you to seek truth, obtain knowledge, and manifest kindness to your fellow man. And we always close in reminding you that your government is your responsibility. We thank you for watching.
Can't believe we are all so blind. I can't believe we are all so blind. Well, the truth is very simple, very hard to find.